The night air bit at Max's fur as he tore across empty streets, every breath a frosty plume in the dim glow of flickering street lights. His paws slapped against damp asphalt, sending tiny splashes skyward, but he didn't hesitate. There was something in his eyes, an electric mix of urgency, fear, and unshakable resolve, pushing him forward. Years of service had taught him to sense danger, to chase down whispers for help. Tonight, instinct wasn't just guiding him. It was dragging him onward through silent alleys and shadowed corners, searching for someone who would heed his warning. Ahead, beneath the soft hum of neon, a circle of bikers lounged by an old garage. Leather jackets creaked against cold metal, boots scuffed puddles on concrete, and conversation drifted over sputtering engines cooling in the night. Laughter cracked like gunshots, stories tumbled out in rough voices, and no one noticed the dog watching them. Max burst into the glow, barking sharp and insistent, his muzzle pointed straight at the largest man. Silence split the air as the bikers turned, surprised by this lone sentinel, demanding attention. Dylan Knox, broad-shouldered and stern, knelt to meet Max's gaze. In that heartbeat, he saw desperation etched in the dog stance, heard a plea deeper than any bark. Without a word, Dylan nodded. "Let's ride." The Ironheart swung legs over chrome seats, engines roared, and they peeled out into the night, a thunderous echo against silent buildings. Their headlights carved bright paths through darkness, and Max sprinted ahead, sure they would follow, because loyalty ran thicker than exhaust smoke. They chased him through narrow streets, tires hissing on slick pavement, moving as one unit with unspoken trust. Max darted between parked cars, weaving like a brushstroke across an asphalt canvas. Dylan's knuckles whitened on the handlebars. This wasn't random wanderlust. This was a mission. Behind him, the Ironhearts rode with a shared resolve that made the night hum with purpose. The wind whipped past their faces, carrying the scent of rain and urgent hope, and still Max led, eyes fixed on some distant truth. A sharp left into a littered alley jolted the group to attention. Broken glass winked under a lone bulb, dumpsters lurked on either side, and Max skidded to a stop at the entrance, chest heaving. He barked again, loud and demanding, daring them to come closer. Dylan cut his engine, heart pounding, and stepped off his bike. There, pressed against a graffiti-scrawled wall, slumped a young woman, her arms curled protectively around two tiny bundles. Her hair fell in tangled curtains, her face was as pale as moonlight. In that frozen moment, every roar of an engine faded, because life hung in her fragile grasp, shock hardly registered before the Ironheart sprang into action. One stripped off his jacket to wrap the twins, another yanked open the back of a nearby van, empty but for stray blankets. Dylan knelt, voice calm as he lifted the woman, her body weightless in his arms. Max pressed his flank against her, as if shielding the precious scene from the cold. They treated the infants like art glass, rough hands surprisingly tender as they secured them in the van. Not a word was wasted. Each movement was a promise to protect, drive. Dylan ordered, and the van lurched forward into the night. Streetlights blurred past, intersections offered no red lights, and every glance among the bikers spoke the same silent vow: get them safe. In the passenger seat, Dylan's heart pounded like a drum. Beside him, Max curled protectively around the woman and her children, ears flicking at every jolt. The city's hush wrapped around them, broken only by pounding wheels and urgent breaths. Would they make it in time? The question echoed louder than the engine. They screeched to a halt at the hospital's glowing entrance. Dylan unbuckled his seatbelt before the van even stopped, cradling the woman as nurses flooded out. "Let's go," he barked, shoving through the sliding doors into a storm of bright lights and rushing silhouettes. Max bolted after him, muscles taut, eyes wild with panic, when a nurse blocked his path. "No dogs inside," she cried. Max's bark pierced the sterile air, pure terror driving his stance. Dylan knelt, calming him with a firm hand. "Easy, buddy. They're going to help her. You did your part." Even then, Max's gaze remained locked on the stretcher, unwilling to believe help could come. The hallway hummed with buzzing fluorescence, walls stark and cold. The Ironhearts gathered behind Max, leaning against tiles, faces unreadable in the clinical glow. A passing nurse asked, pausing at Max's rigid form. Dylan shook his head softly. No, he's theirs. Minutes stretched into lifetimes as they stood guard like statues. Max traced every footstep beyond the double doors, ears twitching, hoping for a sign. Their silence spoke louder than any plea. We won't leave until we know they're safe. When the doors finally parted, a doctor emerged, mask in hand, calm but serious. They're stable, he announced. Relief washed over Dylan in a rush. Max exhaled a low sigh, tension draining from his frame, but his eyes never strayed from the room. Dawn's first rays slanted through high windows, painting the floor in soft gold. Sophie stirred, eyes fluttering open to the sight of her protector. Max rose and padded to her bedside, nose brushing her hand, and tears pooled in her eyes. Later, in a hushed exchange, Dylan secured a place at a women's shelter, warm beds, real help, and room for Max. Hours later, Sophie walked out into morning light, twins bundled, Max trotting at her side, and Dylan's crew flanking them. Ready to go home, he asked. She smiled, every step lighter than the last, because for the first time Max wasn't searching anymore. He had found a new beginning. The morning light in the shelter's common room was soft and warm, a stark contrast to the harsh glare of the emergency entrance hours earlier. Sophie stood beside a row of narrow bunk beds, shifting her weight as she watched her twins drift between sleep and hunger. The air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and disinfectant, punctuated by the sweet tang of pancake batter sizzling on a griddle. Max sat at her feet, tail thumping softly against the linoleum. His eyes tracked every movement, every stranger's entrance or exit, ready to protect his family in this new world of buzzing fluorescence and tidy hallways. A kind-faced social worker named Maria approached, clipboard in hand and a gentle smile that creased her eyes. "Good morning," she said, voice low so as not to startle the babies. Sophie nodded, her throat tight, as Maria led her to a small table by the window. Sunlight spilled onto paperwork that detailed the day's schedule, medical checkups, support sessions, and a parent and child playgroup. Sophie felt butterflies in her stomach. Was she ready for all of this? But when one of the twins stirred and Max offered a reassuring whine, she realized she didn't have to face it alone. By midday, Sophie had signed consent forms and received a small stack of warm blankets embroidered with the shelter's logo. The twins gurgled in her arms, eyes bright with curiosity, while Max lay curled by her feet, alert but calm. Children's laughter echoed down the corridor from the playroom, and for the first time since that icy alley, Sophie allowed herself a small, tremulous smile. Maria guided her to the kitchenette, where pancakes and oatmeal waited, and the smell of cinnamon rolled in like a promise. Sophie took a tentative bite, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. Could something so simple feel so profound? That night, Sophie arranged the twins in their bassinets, tiny cradles placed just inches from her bunk, and settled beside them, Max's head resting on her feet. The shelter was quiet now, only the soft hum of air vents and distant footsteps lingered. Outside the barred windows, streetlights flickered in the early dusk. Sophie stroked Max's ears, feeling the rough fur beneath her fingertips. "Thank you," she whispered in the darkness, voice barely audible. Max exhaled a soft sigh, his eyes reflecting her own exhaustion and relief. Would she ever sleep without the weight of fear pressing on her chest? At sunrise, the shelter stirred to life with clattering dishes and folding chairs. Sophie found herself among a circle of mothers sipping tea, their voices weaving stories of loss and recovery. One woman shared tips on free daycare, another offered to watch the twins while Sophie attended a job skills workshop. Max lay obediently beside Sophie's chair, head on his paws, his gaze sweeping the room for any sign of trouble. Watching him, Sophie felt a swell of unexpected pride. Here, even a stray dog like Max was welcomed as family. Later that afternoon, Dylan rolled up on his motorcycle, engine purring in the parking lot like an old friend's greeting. He carried a duffel bag filled with diapers, formula, and a familiar leather jacket polished to a gentle shine. Sophie's eyes widened when he appeared through the door. "I thought you could use some extra supplies and company," he said, offering a shy grin. Sophie stood, embracing him in a hug that trembled with gratitude. Max bounded forward, pressing himself between them, as if to remind Dylan whose family this really was. Would help always come riding through the night when they needed it most? That evening, as the twins slept and Max slumbered at the foot of Sophie's bed, she stared at the ceiling and let her mind wander. The shelter's walls no longer felt like a cage but a stepping stone. Tomorrow she would attend her first workshop, make new friends, and maybe even find work. Max's steady breathing beside her was a promise. They had each other, and that was enough to face whatever came next. Outside, the night held its usual quiet secrets, but inside, Sophie felt something else. Hope humming like an engine, ready to carry them forward into a future they would build together.